My name is Tendayi Viki. I work with large companies in particular, helping them innovate and try and figure out how to do innovation while at the same time they actually run their core business, the one that's currently successful. I've also written 3 books. My latest book is called Pirates in the Navy. And Pirates in the Navy is about how innovators and entrepreneurs can help drive transformation and innovation within their organizations. My thing with defining innovation is, I always say to innovators, there's this really crazy saying, which is, if a tree falls in a forest and nobody's there to hear it, does it make a sound? And then I flip it on entrepreneurs and I say, if you're an innovator, but all the innovations you're working on never go to market and get scaled, are you really an innovator? And so that's my definition of innovation, right? Beyond creativity or breakthrough technologies, because a lot of companies, they focus on breakthrough technologies and AI and Bitcoin and all types of interesting things. And all of those things are interesting. And even, really great creative ideas are interesting. They're like the source, they're almost like the foundation of innovation. But just by themselves, they don't an innovation make. What makes an innovation an innovation is when the team that's working on this really great breakthrough technology figure out a way to create a value proposition that actually delivers value to customers. And then they figure out a way to get value from those customers back to the organization that makes their innovation sustainably profitable. Only when a team has solved that piece of the puzzle do I feel quite strongly that they can then define themselves as successful at innovation. So there's this thing about execution, I'm not really into that. I'm into a specific form of ways of working. Because you can also just execute crap technology. And like, we executed, we built a thing. And it's not just enough to draw a sketch. You also have to execute and build in the thing. And so a lot of technology teams have roadmaps for building the technology, and they get rewarded for building successful technologies. But building successful technologies is not the same thing as building successful innovation. So there's specific forms of execution that we're looking for. We're looking for specifically figuring out how to leverage that technology to deliver value to customers. That's a specific form of execution. And then after that, delivering value to customers is not enough. You can deliver really great value to customers and lose money doing it. So the other thing you have to figure out is the correct business model that makes that sustainable over time and scalable over time. So these are specific questions that innovation teams have to actually answer beyond just saying we're executing, because that becomes very non-specific and amorphous. We have to really set the right expectations and then hold innovation teams accountable to that standard, right? And that moves us beyond innovation theater. Innovation has to be viable, at least sustainably viable. So assuming you're a nonprofit and you're not innovating to get towards profitability, whatever innovations you put out into the market have to at least help whatever business model you're using for your nonprofit to sustain itself over time. If you're working on an innovation that's just an improvement of your internal processes, you still have to illustrate that there's actually been an improvement in those internal processes with whatever metric of success that you're actually using, right? People will just say, yeah, we're going to move to agile. But you could actually remind them that you could actually move to agile and make things worse, not better. Right? And then another team I was working with were like, yeah, we're moving all our things onto one platform. We're going to call it our One Digital. And I was like, yeah, you could successfully do that and make things worse for the business. So we don't celebrate that you've moved to one platform. We celebrate that your movement to one platform has created X value. And that's the standard that we hold innovation to. Failure is an important part of innovation. But the only reason we know you failed is because we set the standard. We know that this idea has failed because it failed to find value for customers and it failed to find a profitable business model. Then we can take that learning and apply it to the next thing. So one thing doesn't preclude the other, right? And so, because what it stops teams from saying all the time, which is the reason why heads of innovation get fired, is like, well, we've given you $5 million for the last 5 years. What have you been doing? And they go, we've learned a lot. And it's like, okay, well, what is the thing that you've learned? And they're like, well, we had a hackathon, and then we had an idea jam, and then we had a speaker called Tendayi, and all of these things, right? And it's like, yeah, but what is the actual value that is created? So we, as Steve Blank likes to say, in startup ecosystems, we value honest failure, which is a startup that's failing while pursuing value. And we also value that for innovation teams, which is honest failure while trying to find value, and then coming back to us and going, actually, you know what, there's nothing there. Customers would never pay for this. That's something we can do something with, as an organization. That's one of the bigger challenges with corporate innovation, right? Which is the first thing that leaders have kind of accepted all these myths around innovation. Like, you need a separate innovation lab. Innovation is a black box. You can't manage innovation. It's a hidden process. You have to give the creative space and time. All of these things that are just like, no, that's not true. That's not really how innovation works. And then on the other side of that are the innovators themselves, the intrapreneurs. They are really like, yes, we get our own building. We're far away from the MBAs. We're going to do our own thing. And that statement, we're going to do our own thing, should never come out of the mouth of an. If you're going to do your own thing, then you need to be an entrepreneur and leave the company and go work somewhere else. There is no chance that an innovator working inside their own thing and then succeed, right? It's virtually impossible. So we often say to innovation heads that are working inside innovation labs, you need to actually build a bridge between your lab and the core business. Because I've worked with innovation teams. I remember once I was working in South Africa with a large innovation team there, and they worked on a whole bunch of ideas, and they couldn't take them to scale because they were doing their own thing, right? There was nobody in the business that was connected to what they were working on. So when they were ready, unless the company has given you everything, they've given you a team, they've given you a factory, they've given you money, so that when you discover something that works, you can scale it yourself. If they haven't given you that, you can't do your own thing. You have to build a bridge between what you're working on and what's happening in the core business. Corporate innovation is a paradox. And the paradox is you're supposed to be exploring for new opportunities while connected to a machine that's exploiting current opportunity. Not only that, once you've discovered the new opportunity, you have to come back to the machine that's exploiting current opportunities to ask them for permission to scale and resources to scale. And so we teach intrapreneurs wrong things sometimes. We teach intrapreneurs to be like entrepreneurs. And sure, they need to be like entrepreneurs. They need to be innovative. They need to be adventurous. They need to be creative. But actually, the superpower of a serial intrapreneur is their ability to build relationships with the core business. That is their course, like political acumen is the superpower of the serial entrepreneur. If they don't have that, it doesn't matter how great they are at inventing technologies, how great they are at discovering customers, how great they are at creating new things. If you're going to innovate inside a large organization, you need to have the ability to build relationships. Ken Krippendorf, who wrote a really great book called Driving Innovation from Within. In that book, he describes, I forget the name of the guy now. He used to lead up Nike Plus, who invented the fuel band. And he says, like, part of the job of doing innovation inside a large organization is that you spend a lot of time lining up the cannons, like legal, compliance. Then you have to line up the sales. Then you have to line up the marketing. And then sometimes you have to line up another cannon because it's actually facing you and about to blow you up. So you have to turn it around and face it in a different direction. But the benefit of working in a large organization is that once you line up all the cannons and you let the thing go, like the benefits of that institution, all that access to customers, all of that, right, becomes like the wind in your sails. And that's the difference between, that's the sacrifice and benefit that the intrapreneur gets by working inside a large organization. And that's really what they have to figure out. The mistake that large corporations make are multiple. There's several mistakes that they make. But all of those mistakes are based on one problem, which is they're trying to take the way that they run their current business and apply it to how they drive innovation. right? And the moment you do that, you start making all sorts of mistakes. You start asking teams who don't even know who the customer is to write you a 30-page business plan. You start trying to pick the winning ideas yourselves on day one. You start celebrating people executing against the roadmap rather than really showing you customer value. You start making big bets rather than small incremental bets that increase over time as teams show traction. Like all of the ways that you run your core business become the mistakes that you make when you're trying to drive innovation. So the conversation we have with leaders is innovation is distinct from how you drive, but it's still management. It's just a different form of management. When you're managing innovation, you manage by making multiple small bets that increase over time only on those teams that are showing traction. And that's what we mean by accepting failure or making failure cheap, right? So, and in order to do that, you need to have an investment process, a finance process, an innovation board process that drive this particular side of how you do work. And without building those systems, innovation ecosystems, then innovation is much more likely to actually fail. So in my book, I make a distinction between two jobs for innovators, right? The first job is the creation of value, the conversation we were having around what defines true innovation. So we want innovators that are authentically interested in creating value. And then the second part is that we want also the organizations we work for to be able to create that value, not as one-off projects, but as a repeatable process. We want them to do it over and over and over again. So you won the first time, but can you do it again? And the way to do that is to use the initial innovation projects that you're working on, use those as a way to create structures that other teams can then use to sort of follow. So for example, the team at Bayer, they had a really great innovation program there they call the Catalyst Fund. And so they discovered that every time an innovation team wanted to do something, they had to go and negotiate with legal and compliance anew, like as if it's the first time that's ever happened before. So they decided that that's not going to happen. We're going to actually create an agreement and a structured process with legal and compliance of how innovation works inside Bayer. So they had various workshops, had various conversations, and after that, they came up with a structure and a document. Now, innovation teams don't have to go and negotiate with legal and compliance anew. There's a process in place that they can just use, and that allows them to go faster and faster and faster. So not only have you focused on creating value, but you've also started building the innovation infrastructure that allows you to keep creating the value over and over again. And that's really what we believe that innovation teams should be doing. One way to build the innovation infrastructure is to start by trying to build the innovation infrastructure and then find teams. But what I've actually found works and creates a little bit of more interesting momentum is to select a few teams and use those teams as the Trojan horse to create the infrastructure. So because as you're actually trying to do the innovation work, what that does is it reveals the barriers, the block, the things that get in the way. And as you solve for those things, you only have one rule. We're not solving this for this one team that's run into that blocker. We're going to solve this for this one team and all the other teams that are going to come after this team. And if you set that as the way you build your innovation process, then you're much more likely to create something that kind of lasts. So open innovation is a really important piece of building your innovation ecosystem. It allows you to bring in fresh ideas and also sometimes even bring in talent and knowledge that you actually don't have. And even for like pharmaceutical companies, sometimes it's not even legal for them to have direct access to patients. They have to collaborate with startups in order to build the smart technologies that are necessary for them to be successful in the world. So sometimes it's even that important from a strategic standpoint. The bigger problem I have with the way that large companies sometimes approach open innovation is the shiny object problem, which is I was at X conference and I saw a startup working on this really cool thing. We have to work with them. And then the team is like, okay, the boss says we have to work with this startup. So they start scrambling and trying to work with this startup. And then when the startup finally says, okay, we'll work with you, the large company pulls out this 500-page document and says, if you could only just sign this, that tells everyone that we own your idea after you've worked with us, then we'll be happy to collaborate. It's that the whole thing is broken. Like it doesn't have a really structured and systematic process to it. And so I really like to work with large organizations to say, listen, there has to be a strategic initiative that is driven you to go out into the world and look for collaborators. And there has to be criteria that, in terms of which collaborators you're going to work with, and then a system for bringing those in and then allowing the relationships to still remain dynamic and fruitful for your organization. This is an interesting one. I've actually had a Twitter beef about this one. So some person said on Twitter, if you have an innovation department, you're not really innovating. And I was like, that's stupid. I couldn't help myself. Like, that's stupid, because we don't say if you have a marketing department, you're not really marketing. Or if you have a finance department, then you're not really doing finance. Like, we don't say that. So we don't say like finance is everyone's job. Everyone's a marketer, right? So why do we want to say that about, the reason why marketing is successful inside the large organization is that they're both a separate division and they have processes for collaborating with others. The reason why finance is successful inside large organizations is that they're both a separate department and they have processes for collaborating with others. So that's what we're talking about here, which is, people always ask me, are you against innovation labs or are you for innovation labs? I'm like, neither. I'm just for a distinct innovation process that can sit in an innovation lab 100 miles away from the mothership if you want, but a process for then building a bridge back to the core business, because you're not going to succeed if you don't have that. And so that's really where we stand. It's both and, it's not either or. And innovators need to be able to navigate that paradox. That's the job, to navigate that paradox. One of the bigger mistakes that I think large companies make is they think of innovators as mavericks. So they say, let's go find the guy who started a startup and then sold it, and then we'll bring him inside our organization and they'll be like our entrepreneur in residence. Right? And then so they bring this guy in, and he's the entrepreneur in residence, and he thinks he's Elon Musk. And he walks around the organization saying, we're going to save you from disruption. We're going to save you from disruption. And meanwhile, he's building antagonistic relationships with all the leaders that he's going to need to collaborate with later to bring his ideas to scale. And so entrepreneurs are just like, have you ever watched like an NFL game and there's like a defensive lineman and he's like really huge, but his feet move like a ballet dancer? And you're like, how the hell does he do that? Right? That's exactly what an entrepreneur is. They're both this like maverick, entrepreneurial, but also really great at building relationships with people that are actually different in their way of thinking from their own way of thinking. Like, once you find that, you find that that's what companies should be constantly looking for, that sweet spot of those kinds of individuals. And I think that's the way to build really sustainable innovation ecosystem.